All right, so what is the holdup as far as the India-US trade talks are concerned? By when can we expect a trade deal to be announced? And more importantly, how much of a shadow is this casting on the overall bilateral relationship? In fact, both Prime Minister Modi and President Trump had a phone conversation just yesterday. So we're looking at the possibility of some kind of an announcement on the trade deal maybe in the next few days. I want to go across to a very special guest who's joining us now. Mr. Ian Bremmer is the president of the Eurasia Group. Thank you very much, Mr. Bremmer. I want to start off by asking you about this phone conversation that President Trump and Prime Minister Modi had. Of course, the talks focused on the two-day India-US trade negotiations that happened. As we know, India and the US have not yet finalized a trade agreement. India's tariff rate remains at 50%, which is among the highest in the world. Where do you think these talks are stuck, and what might it take to finally resolve this issue?
I think that we've been close to an agreement on several occasions now, and President Trump has changed the terms of the deal. He's added things that he wants from India, and that is included most notably the willingness of the Indian government to stop purchasing oil from Russia, and that is in process, actually. There's been some additional terms around India's willingness to purchase military components, jet engines and the like, from the United States. And also there's been talk of a direct summit meeting between Trump and Modi. I feel quite confident that the two sides will get to agreement. I think it is more likely once the newly appointed ambassador, Sergio Gore, gets to Delhi. So we're looking, I think, at a decision that's coming in the first quarter. It's something that's not going to be announced in the next few weeks. But it has proven more challenging than I think both of the countries would have expected when these initial tariffs were announced back on Liberation Day in April.
So, where do you think the nub of the problem lies? What exactly is the holdup? What is the issue that's holding up these trade negotiations and this trade arrangement or this trade agreement? And why do you think it's not been resolved yet? Because, as you said earlier, is it because Trump has been shifting the goalposts?
I think that, as I said, there have been several occasions where the sides were close and the United States made additional asks. Now, I think the nub of the issue from the American perspective is we want these things. We're stronger than India. They should be saying yes. From India's perspective, you've got third quarter growth that was over 8%. You've got Modi, who's just been very successful in local elections, including a big win in Bihar. He's quite popular at home. And the Indian economy is not enormously dependent on trade with the United States. It matters, but it's not fundamental as it is for the Mexicans or for the Europeans or even for China. And so in that regard, it is with two very confident leaders who are very aware of how they appear on the global stage as well as to their own populations. There's been less urgency to get to yes than we would have seen, for example, if you're talking to the president of Mexico or the prime minister of Canada or the premier or the prime minister of the United Kingdom. So I think that's the way I would frame this.
So I do want to ask you about, whether the stalled trade agreement is sort of casting its shadow on other areas of the relationship. I want to talk about the bigger picture in the relationship now between India and the US. A few days ago, the Trump administration released what's called the National Security Strategy. And the concern here in India has been that that document refers to India more as a commercial partner rather than a strategic ally. Now, the perception here is that the United States is sort of pulling back from the Indo-Pacific. We did not have the Quad meeting that Trump was supposed to come to India for. He's now expected to come sometime next year, is what we're given to understand. It appears as though, and this is the view from New Delhi, it appears as though Trump has effectively handed over the Indo-Pacific to China. Would that be an accurate sort of assessment? And how would you speak to those concerns?
Well, number one, Trump hasn't read the national security strategy. He's not very interested in that kind of detail. So I wouldn't over-index on the contents. But the points that you raise are certainly true. If I were India, I would be most concerned about the fact that President Trump himself referred to his meeting with Xi Jinping as a G2. And that clearly means that power and influence matters more than alignment to President Trump. And he's been very, very interested in trying to get to yes with China. And you've seen that on the H200 semiconductors. You've seen it on talk of soybeans. You've seen it on critical minerals, on fentanyl, on a number of other issues. It occupies a lot more of his time and his interest than his relationship with Modi. And the Japanese prime minister who got out there on Taiwan and made some fairly assertive statements for a Japanese prime minister, quite popular back in Japan, about how it would be existential if there were a Chinese attack on Taiwan and that Japan would need to participate in defense. President Trump did not stand up publicly to support his ally Japan. And indeed, on a private phone call, said, you should really calm those tensions down. So, what would that mean for India if there were confrontation on any of a number of issues between India and China going forward? We've already seen this between India and Pakistan, and Trump's personal relations with the Army Chief of Staff in Pakistan, in part because of direct commercial relations between the Pakistani leadership and the Trump family. Those are priorities. And so India has to be a lot more worried, I think, about the level of reliability of U.S. stated policy, U.S. alignment, U.S. strategic partnership with India.
So what do you make of Mr. Putin's visit to India last week? How was it perceived in the United States? I think the last time they met, President Trump even tweeted about it when Putin, Modi, and Xi Jinping met in China earlier this year. Some Democrats brought this up during a House hearing earlier this week, suggesting that Trump has lost India to Putin. Is there a sense that the strategic partnership between India and America that was built over the last 25 years is losing direction or is not so much of a priority for the Trump administration currently? And how do they bring it back on track?
I think there is a feeling that that the U.S.-India relationship is not as front and center for Trump as it was in his first term. He's focused more on the Western Hemisphere, certainly, and you see that around the border. You see that with Mexico. You see it with Venezuela. You see it with 10% of deployed U.S. Naval ships right off the coast. You also see more focus of Trump internally, and that's only going to increase as we get closer to midterm elections and closer to 2028. So that does not surprise me. On India, Russia, there's a lot more in terms of the symbolism and the warmth of the reception that Putin received from Prime Minister Modi than the substance of the relationship. In fact, I think that the red carpet that was being rolled out is in part to compensate for the weakening of the material elements of the relationship. I mean, as you know, on the military side, India had been pulling away. In part, Russia can barely deliver on the S-400s that India has already ordered because of their own chip shortages, because of supply chain challenges that the Russians have, and the stress of their war economy in Ukraine on everything else that they do. The Indians have already, in practice, reduced their purchasing of Russian oil by about 50 to 70%, just if you look at the number of tankers that are presently on their way to India from Russia compared to what we've seen in previous quarters. We've got that data, and it's very clear that is a response to American pressure. So if you don't have a lot of money that you can put into the India-Russia relationship, then you want to show respect. And I think that's where Modi was over-indexing, especially because, of course, the hosting of the BRICS next year means that Modi wants to make sure that Putin is happy with India and happy with Modi, so that he's going to be a warm, full participant in that summit meeting. So I think for all of those reasons, we saw a very friendly meeting between Putin and Modi.
Now, 2025 has clearly been a year that's tested the India-US partnership that has been built over the last two and a half decades. from Bush to Obama, even Trump 1.0 and then Biden, there was a strong strategic logic that guided the relationship, which is that if any country can challenge America, it's China, and to manage China's rise, America needs India. Clearly, President Trump in his second term seems to have disrupted that. How do you see the India-US partnership evolving in the next year, 2026?
I think it probably gets a little weaker in the sense that the China relationship is going to be prioritized. There'll be a number of summit meetings, at least two, between Trump and Xi Jinping that are going to take a lot of the oxygen out of geopolitics for other countries. There is a focus on the midterm elections, which right now Trump is not likely to see his party perform well in. He's worried about the state of the economy. But the fact that the Americans are going to have those focuses also mean that they will be more interested in stabilizing their economic relations with other countries. And I think that will help the Indians get to a deal with the United States in the first quarter. So less of a priority, less important, perhaps more lack of reliability on the strategic partnership, but perhaps we do see some progress in the near-term bilaterals on trade.
All right, Mr. Ian Bremmer from the Eurasia Group, thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18. Thank you.
My pleasure.